It's Sunday, May 24, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to The Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. Our guest today is a lawyer, public defender, and author. Her book on the criminal court system and smarter public safety solutions, called The Price of Mercy, is published now and is available in all bookshops. Emily Galvin Almanza, welcome back to The Weekend Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to be grateful for your legal expertise for this conversation, because it does seem that possibly the largest fraud, corruption of public funds has been announced by not Donald Trump directly, but certainly his former criminal defense lawyer, that is Todd Blanche, the man who's currently the acting attorney general. This is a huge fund. It's $1,776 billion to be precise, supposedly for victims of alleged political weaponization. And anybody can apply for this fund. This is after Donald Trump tried to sue the IRS for leaking his tax documents, and this was the kind of settlement. I don't want to put words into your mouth, so just kind of tell me your reaction when you heard about this, and what's really going on here.
So, my reaction when I heard about this was that it's quite rich to me, as a basic matter of morality, to think about a $1.8 billion settlement fund that's really a slush fund to funnel money to anyone deemed to have been improperly investigated by this government, the prior government, the federal government, when there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who have been treated poorly by our criminal court system, who will see not one penny of recompense. Let me give you just one example that came from a recent report. This is a small example, but it gives you a sense of things. A report on the state of Georgia showed that over 700 people last year were arrested for driving under the influence, when in fact they were not in any way under the influence, on the basis of police misinterpreting their roadside sobriety tests. In other words, the police said, hey, walk this line, touch your nose, let me see if your eyeballs wiggle. And the police, because this is a highly subjective test, determined that people were under the influence when they in fact were not. And we see this all the time. There are multiple studies. My favorite one is one on cannabis users, in which police drug recognition experts deemed that roughly half of the stone cold sober people who had not had any cannabis at all were under the influence. So we have this is going hand in hand with these sort of like generations of junk science and wrongful convictions, and people in this country who we are quite certain have been wrongfully executed by our government. This is going hand in hand with research on prosecutorial misconduct, showing that in one study of over 800 prosecutors who had absolutely engaged in prosecutorial misconduct, 0.1% of them were ever disciplined, and their victims did not see recompense. We do this by giving prosecutors and police officers various forms of immunity in this country. So basically, as a matter of law, our entire court apparatus has said, if you are wrongfully detained, if you are wrongfully, accused, if you are the subject of sloppy investigation, if you are not given sufficient access to counsel, there are myriad circumstances in which we won't give you jack. Unless you're a friend of the president. In which case, there's a $1.8 billion slush fund to compensate you for your mistreatment. So that's thing number one on a basic equity level. It is justice for me, but not for thee. From a legal sneakery perspective, it's an interesting thing because, of course, we have a law saying that the president can't tell the IRS what to do. We learned that lesson with President Nixon. It's section 7217 of the IRS code. The only way you get around section 7217, which, by the way, provides criminal penalties for violation. So a president who tries to tell the IRS what to do, prior to the Supreme Court giving presidents immunity for their official acts, could have been subject to criminal penalties. Unless the IRS's actions are the result of a legal settlement. So by suing the IRS and creating a circumstance in which the IRS was negotiating with Trump and his representatives, which, by the way, it's like, one piece of the executive branch negotiating with another in a government that has been uniquely prone to cronyism, already it's a legal, ethical morass.
And it was Trump's IRS, because this took place in 2020 when Trump was president, right?
Yep. So you have this sort of like faux negotiation in order to get around a statute that is designed to ban literally exactly this kind of thing, creating not only a slush fund, but also a ban, a permanent ban on any audits. God, I wonder why someone would work so hard to prevent the IRS from ever auditing them or their family members. Now, to be clear, it's not a prospective ban. It's a retroactive ban to close prior audits. But still, you have to wonder why it was important to negotiate for that point as well. I mean, from every angle, this is corrupt. And so you might ask yourself immediately upon hearing about this, why would a judge accept this settlement? It didn't go in front of the judge. Trump voluntarily dismissed his suit. This is essentially a weird private agreement, quasi-private agreement between two portions of the executive branch, essentially, but one of them acting as a private actor. It is a mess. And my legal opinion is that it is a mess.
And the committee, this 5-person committee who will decide the appropriations, is handpicked by the acting attorney general, currently Todd Blanche, Trump's former personal lawyer. He's actually still his lawyer, if you think about it. And you know, there's still attorney-client privilege that Todd Blanche is privy to and has to kind of maintain, even though there aren't kind of active cases. So, I mean, Todd Blanche himself is extremely compromised. He's choosing all of the individuals who are going to make the decisions. Of course, Todd Blanche appears to be a puppet in all but name for Donald Trump. And so, I mean, do you think this is part of the reason why Trump fired Pam Bondi when he did? Because he wanted to get this stuff done. This had been planned for a long time, and he knew that Blanche would see it through. I
can't speak to the various levels of stretch that these people have in their legal ethical responsibilities. And part of what you're referring to here is the ongoing duty of loyalty to a prior client. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ever take on a case that is adverse to your prior client. There actually are ways to make that appropriate. I am not going to bore the teeth out of the people watching this by going into the details of legal ethics. But I will say, it creates the appearance of impropriety, which we are always trying to avoid in the law.
But they don't care about that anymore, do they? I mean,
they don't care about that anymore. No, they no longer make efforts. It's actually weird because on the one hand, our system was so catastrophically reliant on people's desire to avoid the appearance of impropriety, which often drove our leaders to make slightly better choices. I say slightly because it's sort of the difference between the Bush administration making up weapons of mass destruction to avoid the appearance of impropriety in their invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, whereas this administration doesn't even bother to make up any weapons of mass destruction. It's just it's like picking different lies out of a hat every week, none of which are very plausible or have any evidentiary basis that one can find. But in this case, I will say on the Bondi dismissal, I think there were a lot of reasons why an employer could have been upset. I think certainly she wasn't holding up the image that the government was necessarily going for. I think screaming about the Dow when Congress asked her about one of the largest, sex crimes in history.
Yes.
It was not a good look.
Look at the Dow. Yeah.
But I will also note that the people that this administration fires tend to be women. So there's also that.
Do you remember, I mean, you and I have discussed it many times, but the scrutiny about Merrick Garland when he was Attorney General, and that kind of fear that, well, we didn't really know where he sat, and he didn't go out of his way to prosecute Donald Trump maybe when he should have done, or bring in a special counsel sooner because he didn't want to give the impression that he might be biased in some way. I mean, and we talked about it all the time, and we were like, come on, Mr. Garland, and was it linked to the fact that he was potentially going to be a Supreme Court justice, but we were just desperately trying to analyze him. And yet here we are with this new fascist administration where this type of activity is what you would see in a dictatorship. Very standard behavior. To do something, to have the Attorney General be associated with that guy, who's friends with that guy, who's doing that person's bidding. I mean, standard dictatorship practice.
Well, a government based on cronyism and personal enrichment. Yeah, it's a kleptocracy. It's, but I will also say that, like, this conversation we're having right now is incredibly depressing, because the way you want your government to behave is probably more on the Merrick Garland side. And I will complain till the cows come home about the inaction on his part. However, governments that move slowly and with extraordinary care and a desire to not do things that seem unfair to the populace are good. I mean, one of the things that I've written about in our criminal courts is the fact that it operates in ways that directly contravene its stated goals of safety and justice. It makes us less safe, and it creates injustice. And these are fixable problems if only we had the political will. So moving into a country, a government in which our institutions can become not just nakedly dysfunctional, but now nakedly self-serving, self-dealing, and corrupt, it's really depressing that we don't have, any of those guardrails anymore. That being said, perhaps naked corruption inspires more action towards change than covert corruption.
It's funny you say that, because, I was thinking about how the war in Iran has pushed the world towards renewables, an inadvertent kind of shift, courtesy of Donald Trump, who's been so anti-renewables. And it probably will do the same for the US at some point. But going back to Pam Bondi for a second, I was thinking, if you took what she said, which you quoted earlier, and put that in the mouth of Merrick Garland, imagine Merrick Garland during a hearing who goes, Joe Biden is the greatest president in history. Just look at the Dow right now. I mean, that in its simplest form is an example of how far the stretch is now. Well,
imagine if President Obama had done literally anything that President Trump does on a daily basis, right? That's the mental exercise. But the thing about it is, on the conservative side, you don't seem to be dealing with a voting base that perceives hypocrisy as disqualifying. You seem to be dealing with a voting base that perceives hypocrisy as strategic, as an ability to evade restriction and create advantage for that team. And that's one of the things that is so deeply troubling, is that when you have a chunk of the electorate that no longer wants to have a functioning, fair democracy, but wants to simply have advantage for their team at any cost and sees hypocrisy as proof that that advantage is being achieved to their liking, it's a really toxic and destructive thing. The good news is they're not actually half the country. They're about a third, because there's about a third of us who, I shouldn't say of us, there's a third of the country, I'm not one of them, who don't vote.
Right.
So one just has to hope, pray, and white knuckle it that the third of the people who don't vote usually have now had enough hypocrisy, self-dealing, kleptocracy, public violence, and global peril to try and make it to the ballot box in November.
We watched this hearing of Todd Blanche being kind of asked questions about it, and John Thune was particularly kind of cutting and saying that, he was behaving like Donald Trump's personal lawyer. Some of the questions focused on who would be able to access this fund. And Todd Blanche was like, anyone. And we'll report quarterly as to who, where the money is going, which is just, it's nonsense and darkness, shrouded in darkness. But it's becoming more and more clear that it's basically anybody that feels wronged, which could include Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, anybody on January 6 who committed violence, even against police officers. Some of those police officers are currently suing Trump over this slush fund. Harry Dunn, one of them. And you could have characters like Roger Stone coming forward, or Steve Bannon. I mean, the whole kind of gallery of curios, this kind of cast of henchmen who could come forward, and $1.8 billion is an enormous amount of money. And this is just them raiding the cash register, isn't it?
It's an enormous amount of my money.
Right.
of our
Taxpayers'
money. It's not coming from the billionaires. It's not, who are absolved of a large proportion of their tax burden. It's coming from hardworking people. And it's coming on the heels of a massively expensive military engagement. It's coming on the heels of the ballroom that was supposed to be funded through the generosity of our president's friends, and for which now our president is sending a huge bill to Congress. It's coming on the heels of some discussion of building some sort of insane Arc de Trump. It's like, I hope that when there are taxpayers paying $6 a gallon for gas and watching their farming, lives dwindle, and watching their small businesses fall apart, and watching things, the prices not coming down at the grocery store, and watching, even the illegal tariffs, watching those forms of recompense and compensation go to the companies that can then decide whether to pass those savings back to the little guy whose pocket that money came out of in the first place.
Yes.
I hope people are tired. I hope people are tired of watching their dollars go to vanity and self-dealing and enrichment, and not go to the things I suspect people actually want, which are smart initiatives that make us safer, healthier, and more able to thrive.
Could we talk to the mindset of criminality? Because it does seem like the inmates have been given the keys to the jail here. And there's a lot of, as you term them, inmates, I would love to have in power instead of this government, to be very clear. Right. And I mean, the Justice Department isn't really investigating white collar crime anymore, or even kind of far right nationalism, criminality, or they've shut down those departments or reduced them. Is that true?
So, no, just reduce those departments. Yes, there have been huge cuts at DOJ that curtail our government's ability to go after domestic terrorist organizations.
Yeah.
However, also, and on top of that, our government has just decided to target the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Correct.
For their use of funds to pay people to go undercover into hate groups. Now, to be clear, this is a long-standing method of investigation. Like, every single law enforcement agency in the country uses some form of infiltration or undercover work in order to find out information. I've got a lot to say about how they do it. Obviously, there's a lot of corruption. I have literally had a case with a detective who fabricated tons of allegations against regular people. But what I'm saying is that's normal. And yet our government is so concerned with the safety and well-being of domestic hate organizations that it's targeting the Southern Poverty Law Center and going after it as a nonprofit. So our system has always been tilted in ways that should be very disturbing. To begin with, 80% of what gets prosecuted in this country is misdemeanors. Misdemeanors committed by ordinary people. If you look at the proportion of theft crimes in this country, for example, that gets prosecuted, it's a very small quantity of the total loss people experience to theft. A little bit. And most of it is petty thefts, shopliftings, sometimes grand larceny, so shoplifting expensive stuff. Yes, there's some burglaries and some robberies. But if you look at the crimes that are impacting the most Americans in terms of theft, it's wage theft. It's employers not properly compensating people or paying less than a minimum wage or cheating people on their overtime or cheating people on their breaks. Like, that is where the scale of loss is more massive. And yet we have a system that prosecutes the cashier for taking money from the till, but never prosecutes the boss who takes money from that cashier's paycheck. And so, I often explain, in fact, in The Price of Mercy, I talk about what I term uptown and downtown. Our policing apparatus being largely directed at low-income people in ordinary neighborhoods who get hyper-surveilled and hyper-policed and prosecuted for things like being in the park after dark or going over to a friend's apartment building when that friend isn't home, trespassing. And you don't see anybody surveilling Epstein Island, these spaces of enormous privilege that are essentially law enforcement-free zones. I think that what's been interesting about this government is watching them take that privilege of operating in an enforcement-free zone and weaponize their newly attained position of power to go after people who are trying to protect others from victimization. Some of the first grants this government cut when they first came into office, the federal grants they cut almost immediately, were for community violence interruption and victims services. Community violence interruption is the thing that has been so effective. Chicago and Baltimore now have legendarily, like, historically low homicide rates because they engage these really smart systems to send out knowledgeable community members into neighborhoods to figure out who was at risk of committing violence or who was at risk of receiving violence and convince people to put their weapons down. Victim services is another really crucial thing. Obviously, people who are harmed need care. They need the ability to recover mentally, physically, and financially from having been the victim of crime. And if they cannot recover, it actually makes people more likely to themselves later be involved in future crime. So it's so interesting to me that this government, having arisen from the privileged world of non-enforcement, where police are looking at ordinary folks and not looking at them, have then weaponized that position further to go after the very things that intervene and keep ordinary people just a little bit safer. It feels like cartoon evil. Yes. Just like the line of cronies lining up for their cash feels a little cartoon evil. Yeah.
Literally like movie villains.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't make this stuff up.
Movie would be more subtle. This is like old Captain Planet cartoons when Duke Nukem and Dr. Toxic or whatever. Right.
He just needs a cat, doesn't he? In the swivel chair. Yeah. Well, he has one. It lives on his head.
He has a cat. Oh, that cat. Got it.
That cat. Yeah. So, and I mean, it's at times like this that we have to make light because it is, I struggle to describe quite how crazy this is. I mean, it makes Watergate look like child's play. This level of blatant corruption. It leads me to think that they don't care about public opinion. We already know that Trump's polls are through the floor, although find me the 36% of people that still think he's doing a good job, and I'll have some strong words for them. But it suggests to me that they don't really care about the outcome of any of this stuff on the vote in either November or 2028. Like, it's kind of irrelevant now that they have total control of the system, and therefore they can rinse it, and they have become the very swamp creatures that they claimed to eradicate.
It is troubling. There are two possible underlying rationales, in my opinion. Rationale number one being a belief that there will be sufficient gerrymandering to control the outcome of elections. Now, I want to be clear that Democrats have, on at least two occasions, tried to pass a national anti-gerrymandering law, which would just get rid of this stuff. I would also like to note that, Democratic gerrymandering efforts in Virginia, which were approved by the people, have been continually legally undermined in the courts, refused by the courts, whereas Republican efforts to gerrymander seem to go completely unchecked. So option number one is that this government expects to be able to rely on gerrymandering as a tactic that will preserve its power. Option number two is more troubling. There is federal law against stationing federal agents like ICE in polling places. This is not a government that seems particularly concerned with routinely following federal law. Election day is a context in which unlawful acts from the government can thrive because it's a time-limited endeavor. Basically, somebody can do something illegal, like send ICE to polling places, and then there's a whole brouhaha over that, and someone has to file something in court, and a judge has to say, you can't do that, I'm ordering you to get it. But by that time, it's 9:00 at night, and election day is over. So time-limited, physically manifested moments in this country are really, really vulnerable to government overreach. And so I hope that secretaries of state and county clerks and the people who actually plan elections are thinking of this election differently as one where they may need to be especially protective of their voters who wish to use their polling place, and especially creative in thinking about not just how to fend off the types of illegality we're always, voter fraud, or which is statistically nearly non-existent, but, not just the usual concerns, not the usual law enforcement concerns of the polling place, but new concerns that we have not previously had to encounter.
But if you're talking about Republican legislatures, then there's a good chance that they might be encouraged to apply to the $2 billion slush fund. And that there could be bribery there. I mean,
but there
to me, all of these things are connected.
Well, yes. That being said, there have been Republicans who have stood up for the rule of law. And I want to acknowledge that.
Right.
And I want
Brad Raffensperger, and we've spoken about some of these.
Yeah.
But even those people have been on a journey since 2021. And Trump, it seems, and we've seen this with, some kind of recent activity with the Attorney General and Ken Paxton and the like, where Trump really does have a rock solid control over the former Republican Party, which is obviously now the party of Trump. So I think it would be unfair to judge those types of individuals on 2021 data when it's 2026 now. And I do think that there's been a shift.
I agree with you, but I have to hold out a little bit of hope. For example, when we look at the polling for Thomas Massie in Kentucky, we see that it's the boomers. It's all boomers. Boomers did not support Massie, but pretty much everybody under the age of 55 did support Massie. Yeah. And so, I think there is a contingent of conservatives who would really like to have an option in front of them that is not unhinged and that is a return to a country they recognize. Is that a majority of conservatives? I don't know. In Kentucky, it was a majority of young conservatives.
Right.
Supported massively.
So it might not be this time or 2028, but it might be 2032 where we start to see the groundswell of youth, people who may be not old enough to vote right now, but we might, it is going to be generational as I see it. Before people talk about the pendulum swinging back, I don't really think there is a pendulum. I think it's more of a cyclical, evolutionary. But I worry that these kind of elections in the short term are still the elections of Donald Trump.
Obviously, he has a huge hold on the party, but I think that we have to be more nuanced in how we project what might happen. So you're not just looking at generational shifts. You're looking at culture. You're looking at regions that are libertarian Republican versus Christian conservative versus Christian nationalist. You're also looking at regions that have had different levels of economic hit. I'm really interested to see what happens in Iowa this cycle, where there are some Iowa is a state that used to be purple. It's a state that for a long time had Democratic representation in one form or another. It's a state that has some really exciting Democratic candidates right now. And it's also a state where a lot of farmers have been absolutely raked across the coals by this administration. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see how people respond to being punched in the wallet, and
that's if they vote, though, of course, because that is one of the biggest problems is that connect between people thinking that their vote is worth anything at all. And I kind of feel like, I hate to say it's kind of a wait and see, but I'm more interested in what Democrats can do in the meantime. What can Democrats do about this slush fund? There has been talk that, we're going to stop it. We're going to stop it. What mechanisms are there? Because, as I said, I think the slush fund is going to extend right through this, the next 2 years. And it's going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of people. What can people do legally?
Representative Raskin has already introduced legislation to ban the use of government slush fund payoff schemata.
Right.
I think it's also really interesting to watch what's happening in the House and Senate. The Senate this week refused to take up a big ICE funding opportunity.
Yes.
Out of frustration with the profligate spending they're seeing from this White House. And this is, of course, part of that. $1.8 billion is a lot of money, is part of that profligate spending. You also have, I'm so interested to see what happens with Republicans like Massey, who at this point, Massey is so compelling as a political actor. He's persuasive, he's smart, he's a bit of a maverick, and he now has nothing to lose.
Right. We are relying on those representatives who are kind of now out of the system to really kind of finally say what they've been thinking, or to kind of get on the right side of history. Okay, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the ballroom and funding for ICE and a whole lot more. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Starting something new isn't just hard. It's terrifying. I remember right before launching this show, I had every what if imaginable running through my head. What if nobody watches? What if this completely flops? What if I put in all this work and nobody cares? But sometimes the biggest rewards come from taking that leap anyway, and honestly, having the right tools behind you can make all the difference. That's where Shopify comes in. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from brands just getting started to household names like Gymshark and Allbirds. Whether you're building your first online store or growing an existing business, Shopify makes it easy with hundreds of ready-to-use templates that help your brand look polished and professional from day one. Plus, Shopify is packed with AI tools that can write product descriptions, create page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. And marketing, Shopify helps there too. You can create email and social campaigns that reach customers wherever they're scrolling or shopping. Plus, everything from inventory to payments to analytics is all in one place, so you're not juggling a million different platforms trying to keep your business running. And if you ever get stuck, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 customer support is always there to help. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. That's shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. A bid to restore funding to U.S. immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol has been derailed by rows over a $1 billion proposal for security measures tied to Donald Trump's White House ballroom and controversial plans to create this $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund. The U.S. Senate will not pass the $70 billion legislation ahead of a 1st of June deadline set by the president. Republican senators told reporters on Thursday as lawmakers leave Washington for the Memorial Day recess. Emily, let's talk to this for a moment because, ICE is, they're crowbarring things in the same way that they kind of crowbarred Donald Trump not having his tax returns audited into this slush fund agreement. They're trying to crowbar the ballroom into the ICE funding now. This is all because, as you alluded to earlier, that Trump initially said he was going to pay for the ballroom, which was going to be $200 million. Then it went up to $300 and $400 million, and then he was inviting his kind of wealthy friends to get involved. And now, because supposedly of national security things, we know there is a kind of military installation being built under the ballroom, that this kind of gigantic eyesore now needs to be paid for with public money. Trump is just all over the place on this particular subject. Do you think that there are Republicans who actually are not happy about the way ICE enforcement has been going? I mean, there has been a change of leadership there from Kristi Noem to Mark Wayne Mullen. There have been some of the owners of these warehouses that the government have been trying to buy to convert them into concentration camps, effectively saying, no, we don't want our buildings bought for this purpose. And there have been governors saying, you can't do that in our state. There has been pushback, and you and I have spoken a lot about ICE enforcement, the abductions and the kidnappings and This week we've seen more video of some, windows being smashed of a car and them using facial recognition technology to see if one of the guys in the car was due for deportation. I mean, it's very dark times and entirely authoritarian in its activities. So do you think any Republicans here recognize that there needs to be a shift? Because this is not a vote winner at all, is it?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, when we think of like dystopian police hellscapes,
yes,
we think of surveillance that works, right? We think of like, the Gestapo smashing a window and flashing something in someone's face, and then they know who it is and they catch the guy. We have to remember that we're living in a police dystopia where the technology doesn't really work, where people get misidentified using facial recognition technology, especially people of color get misidentified all the time using technology that is deeply, deeply flawed. ICE is just one manifestation of an explosion of surveillance technology taking over even the most ordinary streets. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a system that was originally designed to catch the sound of gunshots and call police if there was a sound of a gunshot, which of course got it wrong all the time. And if like kids slammed a dumpster lid, would cause keyed up police who thought there was a shooting to arrive in the alley where there's kids playing near a dumpster, which is a very bad state of affairs for public safety. This system is now expanding into technology that thinks it can detect human voices in distress. You know what you need to do to detect human voices in distress? Record all human voices and then pump them into an AI to analyze them for distress.
Yeah.
One, how well do you think that's going to work when AI hallucinates so consistently that some people think it may be impossible to eradicate AI hallucination? And two, people are going to have everything they say recorded and sent to a third party for analysis. Yeah. Anything said on our streets. So, I mean, the conservatives I grew up with used to really dislike the idea of mass, constant, panopticonic government surveillance, right? That used to be something that we all as Americans were like kind of against. We made a lot of movies about how scary it would be if we lived in a society where that was the case. Not to mention incompetent panopticonic government surveillance. I mean, it's really the worst of all possible worlds. Deep down in my heart of hearts, I really hope and pray that there are still conservatives who rankle at this idea. I worry that there aren't. Americans have been so lulled by generations of politicians promising them safety in exchange for their freedoms, and so comfortable giving up their freedoms for that promise of safety, that I worry the number of people who are deeply offended by the tactics of an agency like ICE is quite small on the side of the line who perceives ICE as being part of their team, a side of the line that is very team oriented, very, very group aligned. I see it in my own local newspaper comment section where a story will go up about some sort of government abuse against ordinary people. And there will be people in the comments saying, yeah, get them.
Yeah.
And normally if I were on the broader internet, I would say, oh, that's bots from some other country just trying to, change the conversation. But this is my local paper where everyone who can comment is a subscriber.
Right.
And so these are real people. These are real people.
It is a realization that quite a few people in the US are really down for this stuff.
Really deeply xenophobic. And I think also we have to understand that so many of the problems we see right now in our federal political situation stem from the criminal courts. And until we deal with our criminal court apparatus, we're not going to really be able to deal with our political reality. So, for example, decades and decades and decades of case law in which courts have sanctified incredibly poor conditions of confinement, where our courts have said it is okay to leave people in solitary confinement for years at a time. It is okay to have profoundly subpar healthcare so that people are really getting sicker and sicker and sicker because of our prisons. It is okay to feed people moldy food and insufficient calories and, basically destroy them from the inside out with bad healthcare and bad food and bad conditions and rodents and violence and rape and murder happening unchecked inside our prisons. Those are acceptable conditions of confinement. That does not violate the Eighth Amendment's provision against cruel and unusual punishment, because it's not unusual. When you have a world in which we've accepted tortuous conditions in our regular prisons, we cannot then be surprised when there is an expectation of tortuous conditions for people whose only crime is the misdemeanor of having crossed our border.
Do we therefore have to accept that people who are in support of this type of stuff, and we talked about percentages, but I'm starting to think that is America. I mean, it is the Wild West, and that the coasts are maybe the exception to the rule. Or is that kind of too defeatist? Because, it does seem, the more I analyze it, there does seem to be like a push for this kind of European liberalism, neoliberalism, whatever you choose to call it, pushed onto America that a lot of Americans are just very keen to reject.
Not if you talk to them one-on-one. That's the thing. So much of this is an information gap.
Yeah.
Like when you talk to somebody about socialized medicine and you say, hey, should we have government health care? They're picturing all the worst stories they've heard about the NHS in England.
Yeah.
And they're thinking of something that's as expensive as what they're paying now. So they're thinking, do I want to put like a third of my paycheck into a grayscale government bureaucracy, communist nightmare thing where I can't see my doctor? No, of course, nobody would want that. They don't understand that what you're asking is, would you like to put 2% of your paycheck into a system where the government is your insurance provider, but you still see your doctor and everything else functions exactly as normal?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, part of why conservatives have been so invested in destroying our educational infrastructure is to make sure that people do not have access to or the means to analyze the kind of information that would make them make policy choices that help themselves, as opposed to policy choices that enrich billionaires. So right now we have a population where a lot of the country has been deprived of that tool set and therefore subject to the misinformation driven by the ruling class who wishes to use our government as a means of self-enrichment.
Because nothing has got better for regular working people since Trump came in last January. I mean, zero. They say, I mean, there's obviously Republican talking points saying tax cuts, but they never talk about who is getting the tax cuts. It's frustrating to me that people don't push back on that in the moment, because, it's clear that is just gaslighting.
They do. But, I mean, you listen to Raskin or AOC or there's so many great Democratic communicators.
Yeah, it's more reporters that I have a problem with, in that moment. But what we're now seeing effectively are large scale events such as the funding of ICE. You mentioned the ballroom and the triumphant arch, or whatever you want to call it, not least the reflecting pool, which is now costing over $13 million.
And apparently the coding is cracked. They didn't do a good job either.
Well, they got a pool guy to come and do a national monument. I mean, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But these things are going to affect people emotionally because they are almost a desecration of public monuments. The bulldozing of the East Wing hurt a lot of people and hurt a lot of Republicans too. It being done in the dead of night. And I mean, it was so obviously a fraudulent and corrupt thing that Trump was doing, and getting approval for the ballroom, just getting on with it before he got planning and all this kind of stuff. I mean, people know about this. So are these kind of major signposted projects, are they going to hurt the vote in any way? I mean, are these things that will change people's minds about Trumpism?
Yeah, I absolutely 100% believe that there is no world in which the incredible spending of this government does not offend ordinary people who are mortgaged up to their necks and watching their businesses go under and paying through the nose for everything. People know what their bank account balance says and whether it's positive or negative. And there is no world in which people with a negative balance are watching $1.8 billion for a slush fund and however many billions of dollars for a ballroom and an arch and a coating in a monument. Like, there is something to be said about watching someone drink champagne while you're starving. There is something to be said about this being a sort of let them eat cake government, especially when you consider the fact that there are already a lot of conservatives who are turned off by the sheer spending and also sort of obvious strategic failings of our military action in Iran.
Yeah, which has cost $30 billion already and possibly more.
Right, from a guy who ran on no new wars.
Yeah.
So I think what's kind of going back to the point you made earlier, that this government is suspiciously unconcerned with alienating and turning off its voters.
Yes.
The fact that it's willing to let people financially suffer while spending so blatantly without any sort of cover story or communications or attempt to make this palatable to the ordinary person is deeply troubling about its intent for November.
I saw, I can't remember who it was now, but one of Trump's henchmen was being in a committee hearing was asked, who is the triumphal arch for? Who's it for? But who's it actually for? And he really wasn't able to give an answer, but he ended up basically saying it's for Donald Trump. And these things, provided they're reported properly, because we mustn't forget that people live in their media ecosystems. And, you know, if you watch the state-run media, Fox, it isn't delivering material as we are talking today. And so, you know, it is dressed up in other ways. But there is, as I describe, a silent recession going on where people are having to put their rent on their credit cards and you know, pay the additional fees that entails. And that we haven't really heard the screams yet, because, you know, it's a very slow process of people kind of admitting that, you know, they can't afford things. And as you say, gas in some states is at $6 and rising. We hear out of you know, people who are experts about energy wars and this energy crisis, that even if the war was to end tomorrow, the price of gas would actually go up and not come down.
Well, we're in a demonstrably worse position than we were. I mean, before the war started, Iran didn't have exclusive control of the Strait of Hormuz, and now they do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they are in a much better negotiating position for everything else going forward because of the lessons they learned from our failings in this war. And meanwhile, China, which has been investing in renewables this entire time, is going to absolutely eat our lunch in the new energy economy. That's another thing I have a really hard time wrapping my head around, is the degree to which Americans have been propagandized about renewable energy.
Right. Well, the cost of living crisis is an energy crisis.
Yeah.
And it's all intrinsically linked. And ultimately oil and gas costs Americans way more than renewables ever would. And Trump lies about China. He says that they don't use renewables, but they are the largest investor of renewables for their own energy than any other country.
They see the writing on the wall about what the future requires.
This is going to become more and more problematic as time goes on. I mean, we're seeing the effects of climate change in such a serious way. I mean, air quality due to brush fires is affecting large numbers of people in California right now.
Extremity of weather across the board. I mean, just more serious storm seasons, more crises every year. Right now, the Mountain West is in a drought, a terrifying drought.
Right.
And
but there
likely
are
to burn.
no policies coming out of the Trump administration to counter any of this. In fact, everything is being gutted right across the EPA in terms of...
someone described it recently as clean fresh water for the data centers and like cancer water for everybody else. Because we're going to get all the runoff from all the chemicals that they are now re-allowing us to be
correct.
subjected to.
The PFAS is now being allowed. I mean, is it that Republicans simply just have a death wish for the poor? They actually do want people dead and sick because there's money to be made through hospitalizations, medications, and funerals.
I hope not. But if I were an alien looking down on this planet, that is one explanation I would have on the table. I mean, I would say that I know I spoke a moment ago about hypocrisy, like being a win.
Yes.
For some people. But the self-righteousness of the Maha people in eschewing measles vaccines.
Yes.
While not saying a peep, I mean nary a peep about the continual and escalating pollution of our land, air, and water. I mean, like, raw milk is required. We can't pasteurize anything, but the glyphosate strawberries, like, I don't know if I'm saying chemical names right, so forgive me if I'm not, but right. Like the Roundup strawberries, totally fine. Like, let your baby lick the Roundup canister. Like, I don't get it. I'm always someone who's looking for common ground. And I want to say, like, okay, you care about health, you care about organic products, you care, let's find common ground on protecting our environment and our food supply. And the fact that I can't get there just drives me up a wall.
There is another health scare across the world. And it's Ebola, not something that we thought we would hear about again. But this has kind of been born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Donald Trump, as you know, cut USAID, one of the first things that Doge did when they came in. And a big part of what the effort of USAID was getting into communities, being able to communicate about health issues, report back to the World Health Organization, another group that Trump has pulled the US out of. Marco Rubio is now lying about the WHO taking too long to announce the Ebola outbreak. And as we are speaking now, around 136 people have died. The reality is the WHO have been on this. It's just the US has refused to cooperate. And if you join the dots, Donald Trump has actually made the US far less safe by taking out the investment of USAID in these developing nations, meaning that, a flight was diverted. A flight that was due to land in Detroit, I think, was diverted to Canada a few days ago because there was somebody who had visited the Congo on board. This could become like the Muslim ban, but for health, if this isn't taken more seriously.
Safety is collective. I don't know how else to say it. It's collective on a micro scale, where if your neighbor is suffering a mental health crisis and can't get access to support or care, you are less safe.
Yes.
If your neighborhood has parents who cannot get things their kids need, you are less safe. If our world has people suffering from illness, treatable illness or preventable illness, and starving and suffering the effects of climate change unchecked and unprotected, we are less safe. Especially in the context of epidemics and pandemics. The video of Musk bragging about having accidentally cut the Ebola prevention team plays loudly in my mind.
Right.
The lack of consequences for the bros who, used ChatGPT to figure out what to cut, and in doing so undermined our collective safety, will bother me forever. I don't think that they will ever see consequences. I can only hope that, employers looking at a resume that has Doge on it will think twice about what that means about a person's capability and skill set in making very important decisions.
But as we know, viruses don't see borders. They don't see political parties.
No.
But there is this mindset from the super rich, who are the people making these decisions, that it can't affect them. They are ring fenced. I mean, they can get in there.
Yeah, they've got a bunker.
Right. Or spaceships to Mars. They don't have to be involved with this. And
they've got a bunker, but their kid goes to a school and someone cleans their house and someone prepares their food.
Yes.
And someone brings, the items that they order to their door.
Yes.
And safety remains collective, no matter how insulated a person believes themselves to be.
Finally, I always try to end on a slightly optimistic note, because these conversations are apocalyptic and seem to be getting worse, especially when we talk about the chances of further pandemics and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that, there are an awful lot of people who are pushing back against a lot of the things that we've talked about. both in courtrooms, activists, NGOs, people that are stepping up and speaking up and taking, putting their lives to one side because they know what is at stake here and how important this is. Could we just talk to those people for a moment and just, tell people that it isn't as bleak as you might think because there is pushback?
Oh, I don't think it's bleak at all. So to be clear, my personal belief on all of this is that the gerrymandering and the eradication of Black polling districts does something that Republicans cannot avoid, which is that it makes all districts more competitive.
Right.
So in a world where you make districts more competitive, and in a world where our present government has pretty much the lowest approval ratings anyone's ever seen, if people manage to make it to vote, I completely believe we can change all this in November. And not only change all this, in a way that stymies the outflow of cartoon evil ideas, but that creates investigatory capacity in the part of our Congress and that hands Congress the tools to actually do something. I mean, like someone tweeted a while ago, I wish Congress was alive to see this. To me, that really summed it up, but we can bring Congress back to life. We can do a lot of things. And in the near term, I have seen so many instances of lives being saved because of collective action. There are warehouse detention centers that won't open because the owners of those warehouses know they will be protested all day, every day, and their world will just be pretty hellish because of how much they have angered the public. I have seen, there's in my locality where I am right now, we just had an incident that made a lot of people upset, and there's a rally led by high school students planned for this weekend. Young people realizing that they have something to fight for, and also that in numbers, they are incredibly powerful. So there is a way in which the object lessons America learns right now could make us into a much more participatory, informed, and active country, one that reclaims our educational apparatus and demands something better than the slop we are often given.
Right.
This could be a moment of tremendous awakening and a turning point so that 2030 is actually much better than 2026. That's what I believe will actually happen.
Well, I'm grateful for that. We'll certainly see a green revolution where people don't want to have to rely on imports and the kind of...
It's that or die.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Okay. I'm grateful to you, as always, for your opinions, but also for your expertise. Emily Galvin Almanza, thanks for joining The Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.